If I were to ask you, what is the most important date of Roman history? Probably many dates would come to your mind. You probably might think of 27 BC, when the Roman Republic came to an end and was supplanted by the Roman Empire. Or you might think of 395 AD, the date when the Roman Empire split into two halves, an eastern and a western one. Or you might think of 476 AD, the traditional date of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, which is commonly taught in school, but which in reality didn't hold a lot of significance. Or you might also think of 541, the fateful year in which the plague of Justinian significantly weakened the Roman Empire, and of course many more different important years. But the year that most of you probably wouldn't think of as a particularly important year would be 751 AD. In order to understand why 751 AD was so important and why it has been neglected and still is being neglected by most historians, we have to understand what happened after the so-called fall of the Roman Empire. In most schools, if not in all schools, it is still wrongly taught that the Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. This is wrong on so many levels that I don't even know where to start. First of all, the Eastern Roman Empire survived unharmed and would continue for 1,000 more years. So saying that the Roman Empire fell in 476 is absolutely absurd. It might be more valid to say that the Western Roman Empire fell in 476, but for reasons that I explained in this video here, this notion also doesn't make a lot of sense. Because the Western Roman Empire actually continued nominally to be governed by Constantinople in the following decades. The Germanic kings of Italy were, after 476 AD, nominally subjugates of the Roman emperor residing at Constantinople, and they even issued coins in his name and weren't allowed to deviate from Roman customs. In fact, if you would have a time machine and you would travel to Italy after the so-called fall of the Roman Empire, you wouldn't have noticed any difference. Nay, in fact, many cities of the traditional heartland of the Roman Empire, Italy, looked much better in 520 AD than they looked in the 450s after many sacks and devastations by different invading tribes. If you are a fan of Roman history and you would want to buy an item for yourself or someone else as a present, then you might want to consider the SPQR Shop. They produce incredible replicas of Roman history with a very high attention to detail. All their items are carefully handcrafted, and I think it will be difficult to find that level of craftsmanship anywhere else. They handcraft Roman coin replicas, rings, pendants, attributes, and many other items of Roman history. If you want to support the channel, or if you want to buy a present for someone who likes Roman history, please go and check out their excellent site, link in the description. If you buy over this link, you will receive a 20% price reduction, which I personally find very generous. Thank you very much for your consideration, and back to the video. To destroy the narrative of the fall of Rome in 476 even more, the Eastern Roman Empire actually reconquered many parts of the former Western Roman Empire in the time span from 533 to around 560 AD. A fact that many historians seem to be missing or forgetting is that the city of Rome was, even though after many disasters greatly diminished, again part of the Roman Empire from that time onwards, so from around 560 AD onwards. Most historians will tell you that at that time already, the Eastern Roman Empire was already the Byzantine Empire, and that therefore Italy in the second half of the 6th century was in reality not part of the Roman Empire anymore, but that it was now occupied by the Byzantines, by the Greeks. This is, in my opinion, wrong. First of all, in those times, many of the Roman emperors residing at Constantinople were still native Latin speakers. Justinian was, for instance, a native Latin speaker, as was his famous general Flavius Belisarius and many others of the high-ranking officials of the Roman Empire in those days. The Roman emperor was residing at Constantinople in the very same way that, for instance, the emperor Theodosius was residing there in the late 300s. or the Emperor Constantius II was residing there in the mid-300s. But since historians cling to this narrative of the fall of Rome in 476 AD, of course it cannot be that the Roman Empire of 560 AD was still the Roman Empire. But this is exactly what was the case. In those times still, I would still call the Roman Empire the Roman Empire. And Italy was again part of that same Roman Empire. The true reason why Italy never managed to rise to important prominence again was because decades of war and plague had completely devastated the old magnificent Roman cities of Italy. However, Italy would continue to remain part of the Roman Empire for many more years after having been reconquered by the East in the mid-500s. In 584 AD then, the Emperor Maurice decided to create the Exarchate of Italy, and in 591, the Exarchate of Africa. The Exarch was, for all intents and purposes, the viceroy of the emperor at Constantinople. One would reside at Ravenna, the impressive port city that had been capital of the Western Roman Empire for some decades in the 5th century, and the other would reside at Carthage, in the old impressive city that even as late as 600 AD still counted hundreds of thousands of inhabitants. By the way, the name of the first exarch of Ravenna was Decius. Doesn't sound very Greek to me now, does it? The very same name of an emperor that reigned more than 330 years before. Make no mistake, these were still very much Romans speaking Latin that were very often the exarchs at Ravenna, especially in the earlier years. In 568, a Germanic tribe called the Lombards had invaded Italy, and because the Roman Empire was weakened by the plague, they had managed to conquer parts of Italy from the Romans. Yet even so, most of Italy still remained firmly in the hands of the Roman Empire. Yes, Roman Empire, not Byzantine Empire, not Eastern Roman Empire, not Greeks, but Roman Empire. So Italy remained part of the Roman Empire in the second half of the 6th century, but it would continue to remain so for many more years. The exarchs continued to rule from Ravenna, oftentimes even electing the popes at Rome and interfering in religious matters. There was a strong exchange in those times between the popes at Rome with the exarch and even with the emperor at Constantinople. There was great exchange activity between Rome and Ravenna along the Via Flaminia in those days, which is why that corridor remained firmly in the hands of the Romans and the Lombards weren't able to conquer that area for 2 centuries. Ravenna in those times held great importance and was a magnificent and prosperous city, continuing to use the port at Classis in order to send and receive goods from all around the Mediterranean, but also to and from Constantinople itself. In Rome, there was even a governing district of the Exarch and great building activity of some quite impressive churches. If you would have walked through Ravenna in 600 AD, you would have thought that antiquity had never ended. There were great statues, there were colonnaded streets, there was an imperial palace, old triumphal arches, there were Roman baths, and there was the old aqueduct still in working order, having been repaired multiple times in the previous centuries. The buildings were well maintained, and Ravenna in those times would rival in importance many other great cities of the Roman Empire, even though it would never reach the size of Constantinople or Carthage. Yet still, it held great political power with the exarch. In the 600s, there were even many usurpers in Italy, about which I talked in this video, and which, funny enough, you could, if you wanted to, interpret as the last Western Roman emperors, because they were Western Roman usurpers, not much different from Romulus Augustus himself, because they too tried to rule Italy as Roman emperors against the emperor at Constantinople, quite similar to the state of affairs before the splitting of the empire in 395 AD. But the Roman Empire unfortunately continued to lose territory in the east, and in the mid-600s lost Egypt and the Levant to the advancing Muslim Caliphate. In 698, the exarchate of Africa fell to the advancing Muslim tide. Yet still, the exarchate of Ravenna continued holding out. Some more decades passed, and by that time, the Eastern Roman Empire indeed had transformed culturally and was now a firmly Greek-speaking empire. Yet of course, they still continued to view themselves as Romans and their land possessions in Italy as being part of the Roman Empire. Unfortunately though, the Lombards under their king Aistulf began advancing, and the Eastern Romans were by that time thoroughly occupied fighting against the Muslim Caliphate, so that Ravenna then finally fell to the Lombards in the year 751. The last exarch, Eutychius, was killed when the city fell. I would argue that it was actually that date, 751, which held great significance because it was that date after which the Roman Empire in northern and mid-Italy would come to a definitive end. For 2 centuries, from the mid-500s to the mid-700s, Constantinople reigned over large parts of the Italian peninsula, including northern Italy and the city of Rome itself. The popes were very much under the influence of the emperors at Constantinople until that very date. It was only after 751 that the popes at Rome called upon help of the Franks in order to protect Rome and Italy against the advancing Lombards. Because Constantinople and the Exarch had failed to protect Italy against the Lombards and because of religious matters. It was after 751 that Rome would finally become estranged from Constantinople. The Franks later defeated the Lombards and Rome came under Frankish protection. Charlemagne was crowned emperor at Rome in the year 800. It was then only that the idea of a Holy Roman Empire was born, a new sort of Western Germanic Empire, and that the Eastern Roman Empire would now be merely seen as the Greeks in order to delegitimize their claim over Italy. In the following centuries, this cultural estrangement became more and more embedded. And so especially under influence of the Germanic Holy Roman Emperors of the West, the Eastern Roman Empire was then denounced as the Greek Empire. For there could be only one Roman Empire, and the West would see the Holy Roman Empire as the successor of the Roman Empire. And it was the fall of Ravenna in 751 where the old Roman Empire had truly ended, when the dominion of Constantinople over Ravenna and Rome would come to a definitive end. Yes, Constantinople held on to possessions in southern Italy for over 3 more centuries, incredibly enough. But by that time, the cultural influence of the Franks had firmly established the Eastern Romans as the Greeks. And so I would say that the date of 751 holds an incredibly important significance, since it was only after that date that Rome would distance itself from the Roman emperors at Constantinople and now call Germanic emperors Roman emperors. This cultural shift was so profound that the narrative of the Greeks in the East still holds to this very day. This is why historians call the Eastern Roman Empire Byzantine Empire. The term was invented by Western Germanic historians in order to delegitimize the Eastern Romans as being merely Greeks, and that in reality the Holy Roman Empire had the rightful claim to be called the successor of Rome. And this narrative proved so strong that it is still being taught in school even to this very day. And the fall of Ravenna in 751 is what made this possible. Had this not happened, the world would look very different today, in my opinion. And I think that in that timeline, the term Byzantine Empire would never have been invented, and the Eastern Roman Empire in that alternate timeline would never have been called the Byzantine Empire by modern historians. If you liked this video, please consider supporting this channel via Patreon or via YouTube membership. because it is your support that makes this channel possible. You would have my utmost gratitude. And of course, I want to thank everybody who supports Maiorianus. You people are wonderful. Thank you so much. And if you want to learn more about the fascinating city of Ravenna itself, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about the city of Rome after 560 AD, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.